Welcome to a 3-player game of Big Deck, featuring Kyle, Rob, and Ronnie. Kyle goes first with a hand of Dismiss, Seal of Primordium, Explore, Hellkite Tyrant, Electrolyze, Diabolic Tutor, and Vorinclex. Rob goes next and starts with a hand of Control Magic, Titanic Ultimatum, Pongify, Time Twister, Faithless Looting, Akroma's Vengeance, and Relic Crush. Ronnie goes next and starts with a hand of Sarkhan Vol, Underworld Connections, Wormcoil Engine, Bant Charm, Birthing Pod, Karn Liberated, and Tribute to the Wild. Kyle starts by drawing Figure of Destiny. He plays Hellkite Tyrant as a land and then taps it to cast the Figure of Destiny. He passes the turn. Rob draws Darksteel Ingot and plays Titanic Ultimatum as his land for the turn. Ronnie draws Fiery Justice and plays Bant Charm as a land. Kyle draws Terracodon, then untaps and plays Seal of Primordium as his land for the turn. He then casts Explore, drawing another card and playing Dismiss as his second land for the turn. He passes the turn. Rob untaps, draws Karmic Guide, and plays Pongify as a land. He then taps his Titanic Ultimatum and casts Faithless Looting, drawing Armada Worm and Hellrider. He passes the turn. Ronnie untaps and draws Revoke Existence. He plays Fiery Justice as a land and passes the turn. Kyle untaps, draws Siege Gang Commander, and plays Assemble the Legion as his land for the turn. He then takes the figure to level 1, making it a 2/2, and attacks Ronnie for 2 damage. He passes the turn. Rob untaps and draws Baneslayer Angel, then plays Hellrider as a land and casts Darksteel Ingot. He passes the turn. Ronnie untaps, draws Arcane of Justice, then plays Underworld Connections as a land. He passes the turn. Kyle untaps, draws Bone Horde, then plays it as a land. Kyle then casts Siege Gang Commander. Kyle sends the Figure of Destiny at Rob, who takes 2 damage. He passes the turn. Rob untaps, draws Dread Return, and plays it as a land. He then casts Karmic Guide. When it enters the battlefield, Rob returns Armada Worm from his graveyard to the battlefield. Rob then puts a 5/5 Trampling Worm onto the battlefield with Armada Worm's ability. He passes the turn. Draws Summoning Trap and plays it as his land. He passes the turn. Kyle untaps, draws Rock's Faithmender, and plays it as a land. He passes the turn without attacking. Rob untaps, sacrifices the Karmic Guide during his upkeep, then draws Garruk Primal Hunter, which he plays as a land. Rob goes to the attack phase, attacking both Ronnie and Kyle with 1 worm each. Kyle blocks with the Goblin, taking 4 trample damage, and Ronnie takes 5. After damage, Kyle sacrifices another Goblin token to the Siege Gang Commander, dealing 2 damage to Rob's Worm token. Kyle then taps 3 manas to cast Electrolyze, dealing an additional 2 damage to the token, killing it and drawing a card off the Electrolyze. Post-combat, Rob plays Baneslayer Angel. He passes the turn, but at the end of Rob's turn, Ronnie casts Tribute to the Wild, forcing Rob to sacrifice his Darksteel Ingot, and Kyle sacrificing nothing. Ronnie untaps and draws the red Primordial card, whatever it's called, and plays it as a land. He then taps 5 and casts Archon of Justice, passing the turn. Kyle untaps, draws Una, then casts Wall of Omens, drawing Ray of Revelation. He then plays Una as a land and passes the turn. Rob untaps and draws Dispeller's Capsule and plays Control Magic as a land in order to get his second blue source. Unable to attack into Ronnie's Archon of Justice, Rob sends both of his 5/5s at Kyle. Kyle blocks the Armada Worm with his Wall of Omens and takes 6 damage, bringing him to 10 lives. Rob gains 5 lives off the Baneslayer. Post-combat, Rob flashes back Faithless Looting from his graveyard, drawing Faith Fetters and Bloodghast. Rob ditches Dispeller's Capsule and Bloodghast. Happy with how the board looks, Rob cycles Akroma's Vengeance, drawing Demigod of Revenge. Rob passes the turn. Ronnie untaps, draws Oblivion Stone, and plays Revoke Existence as a land. He then taps 6 to cast Wormcoil Engine, and passing the turn. Kyle untaps, draws Thraxamundar, and plays Ray of Revelation as a land. He then nearly taps Oot to cast Thraxamundar, and uses it to attack the crap out of Rob. Rob sacks his Armada Worm and then takes 7. He passes. Rob untaps, draws Vila the Nightclad, and plays Demigod Revenge as a land, triggering Bloodghast's landfall ability, putting it onto the battlefield. Rob then attacks Kyle with his Baneslayer Angel, putting Kyle to 5 and gaining him 5. Rob then casts Time Twister, shuffling everyone's hands and graveyards into a deck and drawing a new hand of 7. Kyle draws Restock, Vithian Renegade, Forbid, Thieving Magpie, Consuming Vapors, Electrolyze, and Explore. Rob draws Wall of Omens, Unsummon, Jace, Architect of Thought, Send Triplets, Lightning Greaves, Hull Breach, and Gideon Jura. Ronnie draws Treasured Find, Epic Experiment, Restoration Angel, Mind Twist, Grand Arbiter, Mnemonic Wall, and Gerard's Wisdom. Rob then casts Wall of Omens and draws Terastodon. Rob passes the turn. Ronnie untaps, draws Death Grasp, and plays Grand Arbiter as his land. He then proceeds to mess up Rob's new hand by mind twisting him for 5. In response, Rob unsummons Ronnie's Wormcoil Engine, sending it back to his hand. Rob then randomly keeps Sin Triplets and discards the rest. It was easier that way. Ronnie passes the turn. Kyle untaps, draws Brimstone Volley, and then decides to play Restock as a land, having just lost his graveyard to Time Twister. Kyle plays Explore and draws Beast Within. He then electrolyzes Rob's Bloodghast for 1 and Rob for 1, killing the Bloodghast to make way for Thraxamundar. He then draws Beacon of Tomorrows off the Electrolyze. Kyle then continues his campaign against Rob by attacking him with Thraxamundar for 8 damages. Post-combat, Kyle plays Vithian Renegade as a land and casts Consuming Vapors at Guess Who. Rob sacrifices Baneslayer, gaining him 5 lives. After a couple of rough turns, Rob untaps and draws Spite Malice, which he plays as a land, recurring a Hasty Bloodghast, which he uses to attack Kyle, who blocks with his last Goblin token, killing both creatures. Wanting to cast the triplets, both a Consuming Vapors and a Thrax attack looming, he opts to pass the turn instead. Ronnie untaps and draws Wall of Roots, which he casts. Ronnie then casts another Defender in the form of Mnemonic Wall, returning Mind Twist to Ronnie's hand, which should make an interesting next turn for Kyle. He passes the turn, leaving the Archon and 2 walls to block any incoming attacks. Kyle untaps, forgets to rebound Consuming Vapors, and draws Moloku the Clouded Mirror. Kyle then plays Thieving Magpie as a land and casts Moloku. With the Powerhouse Moloku on the field, and perhaps feeling a little bad, Kyle passes the turn without attacking. Rob untaps and draws Torian Mauler, which he plays as a land, recurring Bloodghast. Rob then taps 5 and casts Send Triplets. He passes. Ronnie untaps and draws Hurricane. With no cards in his yard, Ronnie plays Treasured Find as a land. With a near full grip of cards, Ronnie decides to Death Grasp Rob's Send Triplets to stop Rob from playing his sweet, sweet cards, and also gaining Ronnie 3 lives. Ronnie then goes to attacks at Kyle for 4 with his Archon. Declining to use Moloku to return a land and make a blocker, Kyle instead takes 4 damages. Ronnie passes. During his upkeep, Kyle rebounds the Consuming Vapors that he forgot to rebound last turn, targeting Ronnie, and since no one caught that he missed it, the play stands. Ronnie decides to sacrifice his Archon, gaining Kyle 4 lives and exiling Thraxamundar with Archon's death ability. Kyle then draws Wall of Blossoms and plays Beast Within as a land. He then casts the Wall of Blossoms, drawing Diabolic Tutor. He then casts Beacon of Tomorrows, targeting himself and shuffling it back into a deck. He then attacks Ronnie for 2 with Moloku. He passes the turn back to himself. Kyle untaps and draws Hindering Light. He then taps 3 white-red to make Figure of Destiny, that creature from all the way back at the beginning of the game, a 4/4 Kithkin Spirit Warrior. He then plays Hindering Light as a land. Kyle then attacks Ronnie for 2 with Moloku. He passes the turn. Rob untaps and draws Dismember. He considers killing the Kithkin before Kyle can untap, but then decides to pass the turn instead. Ronnie untaps and draws Histrodon. Ronnie plays Hurricane as a land, and then Mind Twists Kyle for 3 to get all 3 cards out of Kyle's hand, but Kyle is ready with the Forbid. He decides not to discard 2 to buy it back. Ronnie then casts Gerard's Wisdom, gaining him 8 life, with 4 cards in hand. Ronnie then passes the turn, and at the end of Ronnie's turn, Rob is finally able to convince Kyle to make a man's play and return land with Moloku. Kyle thinks for a moment and then decides to go all out, returning an entire land in the form of Vithian Renegades and making a whole 1/1 blue illusion. While Kyle is untapping, Rob convinces Kyle to also return Beast Within to make another 1/1. Kyle draws Golgari Charm, which he plays as a land. Kyle pays 5 white-red to make the figure Destiny 8/8, but in response, Rob taps 3 and dismembers the figure. It is then noted that figure Destiny costs 6 white-red to activate for level 3, but the figure dies just the same. Kyle then attacks Ronnie for 4 with Moloku and 2 illusions, which Ronnie can't block due to flying. He passes. Rob untaps and draws Makeshift Mannequin. He then casts Makeshift, targeting Terrestodon, blowing up 3 of his lands and giving him 3 3/3 elephants. Oddly enough, one of the lands Rob blows up is Dread Return. He then passes the turn. Ronnie untaps and draws Asceticism. Ronnie plays Histrodon as a land, then taps all of his manas to put a counter on Wall of Roots to cast Epic Experiment for 9. Ronnie reveals 9 cards off the top of various decks and finds the following instants and sorceries: Merciless Eviction, Tribute to the Wild, and Crime Punishment. Tribute to the Wild finds no artifacts or enchantments, Merciless Eviction exiles all creatures, and Crime takes a Baneslayer Angel out of Rob's graveyard. He then passes the turn. At the end of Ronnie's turn, Kyle shoots the Angel with Beast Within, giving Ronnie a 3/3 Beast token. Kyle untaps and draws Faith's Fetters, and plays Vithian Renegades as a land. Kyle then taps 4 to cast Diabolic Tutor, searching the pile farthest from him for a card. With lots of good options, Kyle chooses Genesis Wave and puts it into his hand. Wanting to wait until next turn for a larger wave, Kyle passes the turn. Rob untaps and draws Time Walk, which he casts. Rob then passes the turn to himself, untaps and draws Watch Wolf, which he plays as a land. He passes. Ronnie untaps and draws Sphinx Sovereign. He then casts Asceticism and plays Restoration Angel as a land. He then recasts his Wormcoil Engine and passes the turn. Kyle untaps and draws Obnixilis. He then casts the Genesis Wave, which he tutored for 10. He reveals the following permanents off the tops of decks: Ingot Chewer, Oblivion Stone, Greater Good, Seagate Oracle, Vorinclex, Propaganda, Lightning Angel. Due to Ronnie's asceticism, Kyle blows up his own Oblivion Stone with Ingot Chewer's ability. He then looks at the top 2 cards and puts Jun Charm into his hand with Seagate Oracle's ability. Kyle then goes to attacks, hitting Ronnie for 3 with a hasty Lightning Angel. He passes the turn. Rob draws Fairy Trickery, and realizing that he and Ronnie are going to have to team up to take out Kyle, passes the turn. Ronnie untaps and draws Tolerand, Sky Summoner, as he contemplates how to deal with Kyle's new and improved board position. Ronnie then casts Sphinx Sovereign and passes the turn. At the end of his turn, Ronnie gains 3 lives due to an untapped Sovereign. Kyle untaps and draws Counterspell. He then proceeds to cast Obnixilis the Fallen, which draws a Fairy Trickery from Rob's hand. Kyle then counterspells the Fairy Trickery in response, making the Obnixilis come into play. Kyle then plays Jun Charm as a land, targeting Ronnie to lose 3 lives and put 3+1 counters on Obnixilis. Kyle decides to hold back and not attack anyone. He passes the turn. Rob doesn't untap and draws Crushing Binds. He passes the turn. Ronnie doesn't untap and draws Godsire. Before going to his attack phase, Rob and Ronnie conspire, with Rob shooting Kyle's Lightning Angel with his Crushing Vines, killing it, clearing a path for Ronnie. Ronnie then attacks Kyle for 6 with his Sphinx Sovereign, but forgets to pay 2 mana for the propaganda cost. He then ends his turn by triggering the Sphinx's ability to have Kyle lose 3 life. Kyle untaps and draws Corrosion Grip, which he immediately casts to shoot Ronnie's Asceticism. Kyle then Faith Fetters Ronnie's Sphinx Sovereign, gaining him 4 lives. Kyle then plays Brimstone Volley as a land, triggering Ob Nixilis to make Ronnie lose 3 life, and making Ob Nixilis 9/9. Kyle then attacks Ronnie with the Demon, but Ronnie just blocks with his death-touching, life-linking Wormcoil Engine. But in response to the declaration of blockers, Kyle sacrifices Ob Nixilis to the greater good to draw 9 cards. Kyle draws Goblin Welder, Rubble Hulk, Crystal Shard, Teneb the Harvester, Careful Consideration, Fire Ice, Bituminous Blast, Mortipod, and Smash to Smithereens. Kyle decides to discard Mortipod, Goblin Welder, and Crystal Shard. He then casts Teneb and passes the turn. Rob untaps some of his lands and draws Beacon of Tomorrows. Not being able to cast it, plays it as a land. He passes the turn. Ronnie untaps and draws Inferno Titan and casts it, dealing 3 damage to Kyle. Ronnie then attacks with Wormcoil Engine. Kyle blocks the Wormcoil with Ingot Chewer, and before damage, sacks the Ingot Chewer to greater good to draw 3 cards. Ronnie passes the turn, gaining him 3 life off of the Sphinx. Kyle untaps and draws Liliana Vess. He then attacks Ronnie with Teneb, and before damage, Blood rushes Rubble Hulk to pump Teneb with enough damage to kill Ronnie. Kyle then pays the mana to reanimate Rubble Hulk using Teneb's ability. Post-combat, Kyle casts Sun Titan to return Animar to his battlefield. He passes the turn. Rob untaps and draws a Violent Ultimatum, and with no way for Rob to stop Kyle's next turn's onslaught, Kyle wins the game.